Greed, one of the modes in the Binding of Isaac in which you fight waves of enemies and bosses, in return getting coins for each wave you defeat. And using these coins, you can buy items from an item shop to help you as you go deeper and deeper through the game until you eventually fight the final boss, Ultra Greed. But I wanted to see if I could jump into Greed mode and beat it completely without ever picking up an item. Was this challenge even possible? I had no idea. But before we try to find out, let me tell you all the rules. And thinking ahead, I want to make this a series in which I put up every character against this challenge, so these rules may change with every character, but this is what I decided on for now. Rule number 1, no items. But if the character has its own items that it spawns with, like Judas or Eden, those are fine. Rule number 2, trinkets, cards, ruins, pickups, and pills are all allowed, besides any like the Soul of Lilith that can give us items. And lastly, rule number 3, no setting seeds, which means I have to jump into a random seed every time. Okay, that was all for the rules, so let's find out if this was even possible. We jumped into our first attempt, and you can see that the character I chose this time was Eden. Since this was my first attempt at this challenge, I wanted to use a character that I felt like could do well. And Eden, with the potential of getting any item to start off with, felt like the perfect choice. And the items I was given on my first attempt with Eden were the Jar of Wisps as my active item and Dad's Ring as my passive item. Dad's Ring I was pretty familiar with, as you can just see its formation around Isaac, and any enemies that end up touching it have a chance of getting petrified. But on the other hand, my active item, the Jar of Wisps, I had definitely used before, but I completely forgotten what it did. And I'll be able to better explain it as the run goes on, because for now I was using the restock machine to reroll the shop, mainly looking for two different things. One, a trinket, which was right in front of me, and also a card, which we didn't get this time. And I stood in front of the tapeworm trinket contemplating whether I should get it, and in the end I decided to buy it. And its effect is pretty simple, as it raises your range by 3, and I'm a pretty big fan of range. I feel like it's underrated because it allows you to keep distance from the enemies, and keeping your distance at the end against Ultra Greed is very important. Oh, and while fighting these bosses, it might be important to mention how much experience I actually have playing Isaac, and it's somewhere between 400 to 500 hours of playing time, with about half of it being on PC and the other half being on console, and then probably like 1,000+ hours of watching Sinvicta and Lazy Madman videos. So I'm definitely nowhere near the greatest, but at the same time I do have some knowledge on a lot of things. Oh, and this was also my first time playing in about half a year. But now with my skill out of the way, I ended up going into the shop, buying more trinkets to get a better one, and got the Jawbreaker. And next in line was the store credit trinket, which generally is a pretty good one because it lets you buy anything in the shop for free. But since the most expensive thing I can buy is only 5 cents, it's pretty useless. So I skipped out on it. At the same time, skipping over the devil/angel fight as well, since I can't really get anything from them. There could of course be things like soul hearts and chests to open, but I felt as if the risk wasn't worth it. The second floor shop also had trinkets, but I felt like Jawbreaker was a pretty good trinket to have, since it gives me the chance to fire teeth, which deal 3.2 times my damage. And if I'm able to get some luck up pills, the chance to fire the teeth goes up even higher, maxing out at a 100% chance when we have 9 luck. But as we defeat the last of the enemies and grab the coins, you might be wondering what I'm going to spend the money on next. And there's 3 main things that I was re-rolling for. One of them being batteries for my Jar of Wisps, which I'll explain pretty soon. The second was soul hearts, which you see to the left of the battery. And the third one, which we hadn't seen yet, were the cards. And the cards can be one of the more important ones, specifically the Chaos card and also the Airwalk card. The Chaos card has the ability to one-shot any enemy in the game and is very helpful against Ultra Greed if we're able to get it. And the Airwalk card, again, is very helpful against Ultra Greed because it slows down all the enemies in a certain room until that room is over. But there's a decent amount of cards in the game, so they can be pretty difficult to obtain. But that aside, you might have noticed me firing off these random tiers like the nails and some other smaller ones in a circular pattern, and those are coming from the wisps that are surrounding me, which of course is coming from my active item. And the way that the Jar of Wisps works is that every time you use it, you add a counter that you can see on the top left, and that counter indicates how many wisps will spawn when you use it. And right now, since that counter is on 6, the next time I use the jar, it'll spawn 6 wisps, and these can be any random wisp. Like you see me shooting the nails, which comes from the 8-inch nail wisp, and these in the game are known as special ones, so they're a little rarer than just the normal ones, but since we're spawning so many, we have a pretty good chance to get them. You can even see that red wisp on the outer layer of my circle. You can see it shooting brimstone shots. So if you get the right ones, the Jar of Wisp item can be pretty crazy. But we still had a problem, and the fact fact that I didn't really have anything that'd be enough to beat Ultra Greed, and my only real option here was just shuffling through cards trying to get one that would help me out even in the littlest bit. But still, with no real luck, I kept on trudging through the waves, beating the bosses, and picking up the Sun card before I went down another level. And this is definitely where the runs start getting a little scary, because from the womb onwards, the enemies just get more and more difficult. And the shop in the womb didn't have a restock machine, but it gave me a battery, which was pretty helpful because I could use it to recharge my jar of wisps. So I did have some pretty decent firepower to go up against the enemies. But I quickly realized that since the wisps were the only things I had to do damage against the enemies, it was pretty easy for me to get overwhelmed, so I decided to use my Sun card here just to try to protect some of the wisps. But as soon as the game decided to spawn the laser shooting eyeballs, I realized that using the Sun card there was a mistake, because no matter what I did, I was kind of bound to lose all of them. And this was where things got a little scary, because I'd lost all of my wisps and was now just dependent on my normal attack. But luckily, these were the last of the enemies and no more waves were going to spawn, so I was able to kite them around as long as I needed and eventually defeated them all. But with the boss fight coming up, I knew I wasn't going to deal enough damage, so I went into the shop, bought more batteries, and charged up my jar. And thankfully, the first bosses that spawned in were ultra rats, so it wasn't anything too difficult. And the second boss, maybe even easier, was Skullix, allowing me to make it out alive and with a ton of attacking power. And unfortunately, as I made it into Shoal and walked into the shop, I realized that this level was going to be even worse than the last, because the shop literally had nothing that I could work with. I would have to make it through this level without any extra support. And things started looking a little bad when the red ghosts that shoot the brimstones spawned, because they're pretty easy to dodge, but since the wisps are kind of surrounding you, they sometimes end up hitting the wisp even though you're dodging the shots yourself. And things got even worse when some explosive bonies spawned in, but I had a recharge on my jar, so I ended up using it. But by the end of the waves, I'd basically lost all of the special ones, and I had to just pray that the bosses weren't going to be too difficult, and thankfully the first two were just Stevens. And after defeating them, the next timer was about to go off, which spawned in the orange champion Little Horn and the dark one, who comboed together can be a little annoying, but I was slowly able to dwindle away at their health, eventually only leaving the orange Little Horn alive, who we were able to defeat pretty easily as well. And since the shops didn't have anything special, I collected the last of the coins and headed down. We were now on the last floor before Ultra Greed, and the shop itself honestly wasn't too bad because we had a half price battery, and this battery was very much needed because this floor likes to spawn in bosses even on the regular waves. And even worse, it can spawn the indestructible pokies who just completely wipe away your wisps if you get into contact with them. And in fighting these first waves, I'd lost all of my soul hearts, even losing a red heart. And if you look to the left, you'll see that number where it says 4 out of 10, and that indicates how many waves I've done. And that basically shows you that I had to pause halfway through because I knew that I was going to die. And my main reason for pausing was so that I could go into the shop and get the batteries to recharge my jar. And after getting a pretty solid wall of wisps, I once again started the waves, eventually beating them, but at the cost of half of my forces. And I decided here that it wasn't really worth it to go for a card, so I ended up spending all of my coins on the batteries. And thankfully, I was able to beat the bosses of this floor pretty easily as well, defending basically all of my wisps. And now, with basically the max amount of wisps possible and a recharge on my jar, I jumped down to the floor of Ultra Greed. But before fighting Ultra Greed itself, we actually had a red key wisp, which was spawning red rooms for me, but these red rooms didn't actually have anything inside of them. And as soon as I started to go into the second one, a couple of greeds spawned, and honestly I thought that this would have been a pretty easy fight, which it technically was, but they took out a pretty good chunk of my wisps, so that was definitely a little problematic. But now it was time to go fight Ultra Greed. So I walked in, initiating the mini cutscene as Ultra Greed descended, and I started shooting at him right away. And you can see that I had a Holy Light Wisp, which was pretty good because it kept on shooting down the white holy beams, and everything seemed to be going pretty well, and I had a decent chance at winning. But then something really weird happened out of nowhere. One of the greed gapers coming from the right ran into one of my wisps and ended up taking them all out at once. And I literally have no idea why that happened. It could have either just been a glitch, or one of the wisps it touched was one of the explosive ones that can harm Isaac himself, which ended up taking the rest of them out. But now, if you look at the top left, you can see that I have no charges left, 1 heart, and Ultra Greed is literally basically still at full health. This is kind of the worst situation I could have been in, as I don't have any extra damage, and at this point my dodging abilities don't even matter anymore, because Ultra Greed has this ability where he unlocks the doors and a bunch of greed gapers just start rushing at you. And since I literally can't do enough damage, I inevitably end up dying. And even though this was a losing run, I decided to go pretty in depth on it just to kind of give you the idea of what a losing run run feels like in this challenge. But for the next various attempts, we're going to speed it up a little bit. I had a run with Wavy Cap and Spear of Destiny, and you can kind of just imagine what happened with that. Wavy Cap's always a disaster. I had one attempt which was pretty good because I started off with White Pony and 8-inch nails, both which are pretty good in just clearing out all the normal enemies before Ultra Greed. And even for Ultra Greed, I was able to get an Ace of Heart card, which you can use on that one attack where all the Greed Gapers come out, giving you a pretty decent amount of health to work with. We had a run with the Sharp Straw Star alongside the Trinity Shield, so a pretty good active item against bosses, especially Ultra Greed, and then the Trinity Shield for defense. And then lastly, we had this attempt both with Berserk and Montezuma's Revenge. Both pretty strong items if used properly, and although some of these runs had pretty decent chances of winning against Ultra Greed, they all inevitably end up losing. Up until we landed right here, starting off with Sharp Straw and Eve's Mascara. With Sharp Straw being an all-around good item, and Eve's Mascara making my damage boosted, which in turn makes Sharp Straw that much better. And this combo allowed me to get through the first floor and defeat all the bosses very quickly. And you can see that I was saving my coins here with 32 in the bank because there's only really one thing that I needed, and it was a good card for the Ultra Greed fight. Because I knew Sharp Straw could handle Ultra Greed's health by itself, but I would need something for his minions. And this floor shop also had an Eternal Heart, so I saved it till the end for the next floor so I could get that extra red heart. And thankfully, as I went down, this floor shop also had cards. And after defeating all the enemies and collecting all the coins on the ground, I went to spam buying the cards, getting some good ones like the Hierophant, which give you 2 soul hearts. But after buying one more card, I saw something special underneath, which was this card that looked a little different, and it had the chance of being the Chaos card that we're looking for in order to one-shot Ultra Greed. And so after fighting Monster 2 in a pretty long-winded battle, I ran straight to the shop and picked up the card, which turned out to be the Chaos card that we're looking for. But this didn't guarantee our win, as we still had a slight problem because we only had 3 hearts, and the only items we had to work with were Sharp Straw and Eve's Mascara. And I was able to get 1 extra soul heart from the blue fires, but we were only now going to start facing the stronger enemies in the run. So I had to make sure that I was properly maneuvering around them and using my Sharp Straw at good moments. And you can see that even with a weapon like the Sharp Straw that hits all the enemies in the room, you can still get overwhelmed at times. And the situation started getting a lot more dire than I thought it was going to be, because my hearts ended up dwindling all the way down to half a heart. And thankfully, because of the Sharp Straw's ability, there were a couple of half hearts laying around, because if they didn't exist, I would have lost a couple of times because I got hit by the masks. But thankfully, after the masks were gone, we only had to deal with the dips, which were pretty easy to defeat. And the shop didn't have any soul hearts for me, but it did have a restock machine that I could try to get them from. So I spent some of my money, and after a couple of rerolls, we were thankfully able to get the soul hearts that we're looking for, bringing us all the way up to 5 hearts. But we still had to fight the bosses of the womb, which first ended up being 2 super gluttonies, and I was able to defeat one of them before the timer ran out, but the second one stayed alive, and it was seeming pretty bad because the next enemies were Gertie Juniors, who can be very annoying because of their speed. But this actually ended up working out in my favor because the super gluttony was able to deal more than half their health to both of them. And then I was able to take out the rest, but you can see in the top left that I only had 2 hearts left. And so I spent my coins on the 1 heart that I could afford and then headed to Shoal praying that I'd survive. The shop had a soul heart, but then of course a half off Sci-Fly just to tease me, and without really any other moves, I decided to start the waves. And somehow, while keeping my distance and dodging a lot of the projectiles, I was able to preserve a lot of my health. And we ended up defeating the normal waves, only losing a single soul heart, which was definitely a lot better than the womb. And starting the boss waves, I felt a lot more confident because I now had bought more soul hearts with my coins. And thankfully, the bosses that were spawned were pretty easy, being Ragmans and Pestilence. And with the coins I collected, I bought a couple more soul hearts. Afterwards, jumping down onto the final floor before Ultra Greed. This is always usually the most difficult floor because there's so many bosses and a high health enemy spawning. So if things got too chaotic, I was very willing to press the button to stop the waves, which is exactly what I did after the 4th wave spawned in because too many enemies were on the screen at once. And even right here, I felt like that I might die because I didn't know if I was going to be able to defeat them, but thankfully Sharp Straw came in clutch, defeating most of them. And it's important to remember that this floor is basically the last hurdle of this challenge because Ultra Greed can just be taken out instantly using the Chaos card. So I needed to do whatever was possible to survive just this floor. And I got pretty lucky with the restock machine again as I got soul hearts from it. But things weren't looking that good because I only had 2.5 hearts and still the rest of the waves to go. And the first couple of enemies were just Pride, so they're pretty easy to defeat, but then some Visses spawned, were much scarier, so I have to make sure that I'm not getting lasered by them across the map. And thankfully, I was somehow able to defeat these waves, losing only 1 heart. And so I ran straight to the shop, buying 2 more soul hearts, and pressed the button to the boss battles because it's basically the last things I needed to do. And I was kind of unsure here, so I decided to press the button just to make sure that I didn't get overwhelmed by the next wave of bosses that spawn, because the 2 masks of infamy are pretty bad just by themselves. And Sharp Straw was definitely the saving factor here, because it made it to so I didn't have to try and get behind the mask to do damage to him. And using the Sharp Straw, I was able to defeat them both, leaving now only the last boss fight left of this floor, who somehow ended up being the matriarch. And after seeing it, I was so thankful that I decided to press the button while going up against the infamies, because if this spawned while I was fighting them, it would have been GG's. Even the matriarch alone was pretty scary, but I was able again to keep my distance using the Sharp Straw and deal damage to it pretty consistently, which then eventually a big chub came out and this fight had gotten much easier and we defeated the rest of the monsters, leaving me just enough money to buy 1 more soul heart and finally head down to Ultra Greed. But of course, before fighting Ultra Greed, we still had 1 more room to go up against, which honestly ended up being a pretty unlucky spawn because these guys were shooting a ton of projectiles, making me dodge them, but at times I'm not the greatest at dodging, so I ended up losing all of my soul hearts by the end of the battle. And this was basically it. I was gonna defeat this monster and enter that gate and just had to make sure that I hit Ultra Greed with my Chaos card, because if I didn't, it meant that I lost the run as I don't really have any saving factors. So let's walk in.